Right, so we're back again. It's the end of round 3, it's the start of round 4, and I'm here with Carlo, and we're going to be talking about the round 4 predictions today. How you doing, Carlo?
Pretty good at my end.
Yeah, good stuff. How did Dark Winds, Dark Words do for you?
Well, I mean, from a TO's perspective, it wasn't the easiest round.
Mhm.
We tried to head off any problems by creating a relatively large set of questions that people had asked. I answered anything I could with the CMON forums and FAQs to try and make sure that official answers were given whenever possible. But a lot of things, effectively, I just had to answer myself because there just isn't enough information out there from Simon really about the way the secret objectives interact with this game mode. Unfortunately, the secret objectives, as good as I think they are, they're written for Winds of Winter,
Yes.
and they're
Yeah.
also written, you know, basically almost coming on 2 years ago now, and the game has moved forward, and there are some interesting interactions. To list them all is very difficult, but I think that everybody was pretty sensible with it and got on with it. And that apart, I think it's a really great game mode. I just think that the secret mission deck itself needs to have its wording updated and renewed so that it interacts with the newer game modes that use them in a less ambiguous way.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. I know that from reading a lot of the forums, especially the main Facebook group as well, that quite a lot of people, after playing Dark Winds Not Words, not very much, either through practice or through the tournament, or just through games that they'd seen, had actually gone, I think this game mode's actually not bad.
Yeah.
So I think the play rate of the game mode has gone up a lot, which I think is brilliant. Um, One shout out I wanted to make as well. It was CS Sully 13. I think Chris Sullivan is his name, who won the first prize, wasn't it, of the tournament so far. Um,
Yeah.
he got beat 18-1 by Mr. Fox, I believe. Oof.
Yeah, for a while I thought maybe it was going to be a close run thing. I hadn't actually particularly stated the official way that I was going to state or decide who was the biggest loss. Wasn't sure if maybe two people lost by 6 or 7 VP margin or something like that. How I would determine it, I guess I was thinking, oh, I'll have to go to units destroyed as a secondary tiebreaker, and then all of a sudden a result came in which was 18-1, and I thought, well, nobody's gonna nobody's gonna do better than that.
No.
So yeah, Chris took one for the team there, and won himself some turning arcs
Hmm.
from Carl Kirsten Peacekeeper Games, now called, I guess, West Coast Bannermen,
Hmm.
who we're doing the predictions for right now. So
Yeah.
good. Well, congratulations to Chris, and big thanks to Carl for that. There will be a few more prizes from Carl coming later on in the tournament.
Cool. Yeah, brilliant. Again, shout out to Chris there. We've all been on the losing end of some pretty horrific games. But yeah, big shout out to that, and hopefully that consolation prize will make him feel a little bit better going into round 4. Some other shout out stuff for round 4. We just do a little look at the stats again at the end of round 4, and we had some interesting things here. Just an honourable mention, really. We talked about Stark Outriders before on this and multiple other times we talked. The Stark Outriders is still posting a 70% win rate. Um,
Yeah.
Now,
And what's
what?
interesting about this is that we haven't yet. This statistic doesn't remove mirror matchups.
Yeah.
So all mirror matchups, obviously, one side has to win and one side has to lose, which will basically force all statistics towards closer to a 50% win and loss ratio.
Hmm.
But they managed to post 70% win ratio, even including the relatively numerous Stark versus Stark and Outrider versus Outrider matchups that exist. So they are massively outperforming anybody they play against that isn't a Stark.
Yeah. I think, from the community across the board, the buffs they received, and the various chats that we've had before, I think it wouldn't come as a surprise for people to say, yeah, cost-effective, valuable unit. So I think it's interesting to see it up that high, and I think the buffs, maybe
Mm.
they went too far. Maybe it's a talking point there. Maybe they went too far. Maybe they were just right. We'll never know.
Dark Winds, Dark Words, however, is a great game mode for them, as we talked about quite in depth last week.
Yeah.
Cavalry do well in that game mode. We might see that drop and change now because we're about to play into Feast for Crows, and this is one of the few game modes that actually give you an advantage for having infantry as your specific keyword, because infantry will allow you to deploy the next objective, the next corpse pile when you get destroyed. Whereas if you go and take that token with cavalry, get destroyed, then you're not going to be able to place the corpse pile where you want it, which is effectively going to be roughly 1 foot onto your side of the board.
Yeah, so I mean, hopefully we'll see those change, or maybe we won't. I think it's certainly one we're going to be watching for the rest of the tournament. Another one that I was going to mention here, we can see the Stormcrow Mercenaries posting a very healthy 69% win rate of 16 plays, 11 wins. Now again, we aren't removing mirror matches at this moment, but 69% win rate for Stormcrow Mercenaries, something that is widely considered across the community as being a bit of a meh unit.
Yeah, I mean, I have Stormcrow Mercenaries. I have 2 boxes.
Crazy man.
And I mean, I have 2 boxes of everything. I barely use them. I don't see their value myself, and I struggle to find a place for the mercs, particularly the archers. I see a use for them, particularly in my Baratheon army, because I don't have another choice. But these mercs are massively outperforming what most people think that they should be able to achieve. For me, this might I haven't looked in depth at where these wins come from and where they're being fielded. This might be attached to basically reducing Stark attachment costs and squeezing in even more activations by buying yourself a unit with Rickon for 5 points, a unit with Bran and Hodor included for 6. You're getting yourself 2 activations for 5 points, 2 activations for 6 points there. And I know that is a use that some people make of it. Personally, I think I'd rather just have the 1 point into Stark Sworn Swords, who are a pretty efficient unit in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, some people are doing something right with these Stormcrow mercs. And I don't know what it is, because you've got me beat there.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk about other things later on down the line. I think we're going to talk about the effect of wolves and stuff later on in the tournament, where we can really separate the stats out, because at the moment there's a lot of mirror matches for most of these things. So we need to be able to filter those out, which is what we're going to be working on this week. Moving over to NCUs then, we've got Courtney Penrose, Castellan of Storm's End. This is the commander version of Courtney, who appears as an NCU. 7 games played, 6 wins, 86% win rate. Not just for an NCU, but for a commander as well.
Courtney is very strong, in my opinion. I have been trying to play him myself. And unfortunately, I've been keeping his stats down. I haven't been winning as much as I think he is good. But I think he is an incredibly strong commander for the Baratheons right now. And I do believe he is the best Baratheon choice, particularly, I think, just all round. Specifically in the Renly side of things, I think that's very true. I think that the Baratheons are struggling to get the kind of high activation count that you want to be able to compete with them having a lot of units in around the 7-point mark, the 8-point mark, when those 7-point units, they really want a 1-point attachment, in my opinion.
Yeah.
To really get some high efficiency out of them. But that's going to make it very difficult for you to get enough units out there. And so I think that an NCU commander is a very good choice for them in general. And outside of that, Courtney has a pretty strong influence effect and a great set of control cards.
So we'll move on quickly. We'll move on to the attachments. And I think the attachment we want to talk about was the Crannogman Warden. Do you want to take that?
The Crannogman Warden has been performing very well. I think that his role in the Crannogman themselves is very efficient. The Crannogmen themselves are doing well as one of the top-rated Stark units, up there with, I believe, a 69% win ratio too.
Yep, I'll just go along and check. I think
And
it's
I
69.
think when in that unit, his efficiency is incredibly high. And I think that if you're one of those Stark players who isn't winning, then maybe the Crannogmen are something that you should consider looking at. The combo potential between the Crannogmen with the Warden, with Arya, makes for some very explosive damage, but it requires quite technical movement. So I think it's a very high skill unit, and I think it benefits players with a good depth of experience with the Starks. And I think that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing some very experienced Stark players using it to great effect and getting a huge amount of value out of him.
Yeah, definitely. So as you said there, the Crown won 69% win rate, 13 games played, 9 games won. Yeah, I think Stark players are getting a lot of effectiveness out of the attachment. Potentially in other units as well. We talked about maybe Stormcrow mercenaries. Maybe he's
Mm-hmm.
been used there. We'd have to look at a more in-depth look at the lists, which we'll talk about later on down the line when the tournament's coming to an end, and we'll talk about we'll be able to separate all these win rates out, and we'll be able to look at different lists and look at different things that seem effective. From not just the winning lists, but also from we've said it before, the bottom end of the tables as well. Lists that
Yeah.
perhaps played by players who aren't doing so well in the tournament, but that doesn't make them worse lists. So I think we'll get a
Yeah,
more.
as with all things statistics, there needs to be a certain amount of entries before we can make any educated guesses as to what it means. We're always using the statistics to point to a more qualified kind of answer. The statistics themselves aren't an answer to something being strong or being weak, but
Agreed.
it tells you where to look. But
Mm-hmm.
when there aren't enough results, it can tell you to look in the wrong place. So really, more data is always going to be what gets us a more in-depth analysis.
Yeah. I think that will bring us on to well, one thing I wanted to mention before, just a little tidbit of kind of information, things to come. But we talked about this at length throughout the week. We've been looking at activation at the moment, and Stark's coming in at 8.85 as the highest average activations, whereas Free Folk at 8.75, and known as the Horde Army. Um, for those watching the video, maybe leave some comments in below, see what you think about that one, because that's maybe something that needs to maybe be addressed or looked at. Not sure. Um, so we'll leave the stats talk there for now, and we're going to move on to the predictions. So predictions going into round 4, it is Feast for Crows, and the West Coast Bannermen, Peacekeeper Games, Carl Curson, now West Coast Bannermen, on their prediction, as you can see on the screen here, it's got us talking about the first 2 infantry units destroyed, as well as who's going to win the game. So that's what we're going to be looking at. I did want to summarise quickly our predictions from round 3. If anyone goes back and watches that video, you'll see that we got 7 out of 8 predictions correct, which I think is pretty good. Big thumbs up there. One thing we will say as well is that 8th prediction, again, if you've watched the video, it was a long debate over Griffin and Codfather, and Carlo definitely swung it more on the Griffin side based on the stats, and I agreed with him, so I can't be to blame. It's not entirely Carlo's fault.
Nah, what can
60-40.
I say?
60-40
No,
his fault.
I I had faith in the Ranger trackers to be able to pull more than their values weight in that game mode, but it seems that they just didn't. It didn't go quite the way we thought it might. But you're right, we really did go back and forth on that game mode for a long time. Of the 8 predictions we sat and made, that is the only one we got wrong. The other 7 all came in the way we thought they would.
Mm-hmm.
Even I would say some people might have said that they think that Brett would be able to outplay Bob Bernard as a more unknown player. But looking at those lists, I was pretty confident at the time that Bob's list was just better suited for the game mode.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great stream. Well, I mean, some technical issues, but it was a great game to tune in to see. Hosted by 3 Sales Gaming. And, well, I'm really glad that Bob managed to come through and show him to be a high skilled player and win that game mode.
Yeah, yeah. And I really think it shows, as you say, I think it really shows that the apparent randomness of a winner in Dark Winds, Dark Words was hopefully debunked. Because
Yeah, I think that
yeah,
we were able to predict 7 out of 8 of those games. We were torn on the 8th, but we were pretty confident on the other 7. And we got all of them right. That says that this isn't a coin flip matchup, which people have been claiming.
hmm
Really, if you think that this is a completely random game mode, if you think that it's a coin flip based on what objectives come up in that game, then I think you don't understand list building in the right way for this game mode specifically. You understand list building for a more aggressive, more destroy your opponent dominated game mode,
hmm
which is fair because that is the other 5 out of 7 competitive game modes for what Simon claim are competitive. That is what their objective generally is. They all put them in different colors and different styles. The most competitive, the most aggressive, obviously being Fire and Blood.
hmm
The most control being Game of Thrones, effectively, and everything else is some shade in between of the other 5. But the secret objectives deck massively shakes up the game in a totally different way. And if you think that it's completely random, then you don't understand the game mode in the same way, I think, because
hmm
we were able to make 7 out of 7, 7 out of 8 of those picks the right way.
Yeah. So we'll leave that discussion Dark Winds, Dark Words there, and we will actually move on to table one. So we've got Bob Bernard versus Stannis, 1000th Lord Commander. A big good brief shout out obviously to NRG and actually 3 Sales as well while I'm here. I think we're looking at getting all of the top 4 tables streamed this week, so hopefully we'll be able to bring all that content to you this week. And we'll be able to certainly capture everything, but of course we're trying to capture as many games as we can. So if there's any games out there that you want to capture, or any games that you're going to be participating in that you could maybe let us know which ones you want to see, we'll see if we can arrange that. So Bob Bernard versus Stannis. This is going to be Bob's Starks versus Stannis's Baratheons, isn't it?
Yep, of all the top 4 that we're going to look at here, this is the one I'm most interested in. This is the one that excites me the most. It's a big test for the Baratheons. Can they come up against a high-skilled Stark player in a whole range of different game modes, and come out on top? And I love Stannis's Axel Florent, R'hllor Faithful heavy list into this game mode. I think it is a great place for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he has a real shot here.
Yeah, so Stannis 1000th Lord Commander, Axel Florence list. He runs R'hllor Faithful Bolton Flayer, R'hllor Faithful with Bolton Flayer. What else have we got? Wardens Naked, and Stormcrow Archers with the Stormcrow Lieutenant. And all of that with, of course, Axel Florent, NCU Commander, Melisandre, and Shira Errol. Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I think that list is very strong. The R'hllor Faithful having very good morale. It plays away from that Feast for Crows, kind of like, I'm going to hurt you with the morale, I'm going to take that token away, and he basically says, well, no, you're not. And then also, the R'hllor Faithful with their ability, when they're collecting these faith tokens, they can spend a faith token after they're attacked to do a morale check, I think at -1, based on the number of ranks left or something like that, back. So yes, you might do some damage, and yes, they might fail the check, and you might take the token off them in Feast for Crows. But then he just goes, well, I've probably already passed the morale check at this point, so I'll just spend a token, and you're going to check. And if you fail, which you probably are, because your morale is probably worse than mine, you're going to give me the token back. And so, yes, you may have hurt some of me, you may have killed some of us, but we've still got the token, we've still got the objective. So I think that's going to play massively into Stannis' hands. Um, what else do you
So
think about
Stannis,
this?
so Stannis's big advantages are that he is relatively heavily into panic-based mechanics, and they work quite well in Feast for Crows. You've got those automatic corpse piles down, which are going to help you push through that panic damage. But more importantly, you are going to be able to control the passing of the token from one unit to another.
Mm-hmm.
You are going to be resistant to losing it yourself. And what the real cherry on the cake here is if you can be aggressive with those R'hllor faithful, your opponent can't ignore them because of how strong they are for moving the token from one unit to another. And yet, when they die, they have their additional effects. When they die, they're quite likely to spawn a new corpse pile.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all things that this game mode wants to see. On the other hand, we are playing into Starks. They are ever strong.
Yeah.
And what's going to be important here is if there is enough Stark maneuverability for Bob to be able to get out there and get control of the tokens early enough and hold on to them with that slightly better than average Stark morale.
Yeah. I think I'd like for Bob, I'd quite like to see him be quite tactical with placements of terrain that's going to limit the battlefield in different ways. So not necessarily palisades where he'll filter units, because he's going to probably come down on the wrong side of that with probably a larger activation advantage. But certainly I think I'd like to see him use things like marshes to slow the Baratheon down, because the Baratheon Wardens appearing in this game are already quite slow. So slowing them down further will mean, yes, these R'hllor faithful with the 5 movement can get up, but they won't have much support. And that's when I think the Stark player can really take advantage. And I think if the Stark player gets to those early corpse piles and manages to hold on to them and control the movement of units around those corpse piles, I think that's where he wins.
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting matchup.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Stannis' list is well suited to the game mode, but so are Starks in general. Starks in general suit this game mode quite strongly too.
Yep.
It is about getting out there first and making it a difficult choice for your opponent as to whether or not he wants to destroy you, generating a new corpse pile, or if he even has the ability to take that token off you.
Yeah. Okay then. So who do you want to bet for this one then, Bob or Stannis? Do you think Stannis will buck the trend? Do you think his R'hllor faithful list is going to be strong enough, or do you think Starks, with their just relatively dominance performance and high pick rate, do you think they're just going to win through? Especially with Bon Bernard, who's clearly looking like one of the best players we've got at the tournament.
I want to go for Stannis. My heart says Stannis. If this list can't win this game mode, then the Baratheons aren't competitive on a level with the Starks.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. A big shout. Obviously, it's worth remembering that Baratheons haven't got all their stuff out. And for those of you watching the CMON Virtual Expo, there would have been some interesting things over the weekend that you may think, oh yeah, they'll be doing much better. But yeah, I would tend to agree. In terms of faction specific matchups on the website, you can see there's only 5 games total played, but it does look heavily in favour of Starks. But again, from such a small sample of 5 games, this is very hard to get any real conclusive evidence, really. Um, Okay then, so I think that sounds like we're putting it down to Stannis. The first 2 infantry units that you think will be destroyed then in this particular game.
If Stannis is going to win, it needs to be at least one of them needs to be the R'hllor faithful. He needs to be aggressive. He needs to get them out there. They are his high movement. They are his token holders. They are his unit that wants to die or is willing to die and get good effects upon its own death. At least one has to be that. If he can make it both, then I think he's probably already won the game. unless he's so overwhelmed because those deaths came so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a very dominant Feast for Crows performance if you can ever have yours be both of the units that die, giving you complete control. It's far more likely in anything outside of maybe a free folk matchup that it will be a 1-for-1 kind of trade.
Mm-hmm.
So really the question comes down to, what is Bob going to lose?
It's a good question. So Bob Bernard, what list do you think he's going to play? Probably his Roderick list for an on-field commander for that extra 1 VP.
Yes, I guess Roderick will allow him to control an objective for 2 VPs.
In which case, it's probably he wouldn't want to spend Rickon doing it. Rickon's Tully Swan swords, they're obviously very good at holding objectives, but the Tully Swan shields with Rickon, the 2 VPs that you give up, you probably don't want them to be dying first. So maybe one of his Sirio Pharrell Stark Sworn swords, or maybe his
It
Great
could be
Axes
them.
with Bran.
Yeah, it could be those. The question is how aggressive he is with the Umber Berserkers themselves.
Well, with Roderick in them, it would
With
be
Roderick
risky,
in
of
them.
course, because you would be throwing away the potential for the
Yeah.
extra VPs every turn. But
The Great Axes are a very strong defensive unit, and it's very likely that he will use them aggressively onto one of the objectives. The question is if Stannis has the explosive potential to kill them off early, like fast. It could, it could well be a Great Axes kill a unit of R'hllor Faithful, and something like Last Stand is the return kill. Like, I really do think that is maybe what's going to happen here.
Okay.
But I think that maybe the Sworn Swords are the unit that Bob Bernard will use most aggressively and is most likely to lose.
Yeah, I can get
I
behind
think
that.
that I think that when I look closer at the list, he runs the Great Axes in both lists with Bran and Hodor, but his other Howland list runs 2 units of Outriders, and as well as they're performing, that won't allow their death to spawn a new objective on your own side. So I doubt that he will run that list. I think he will be running his more heavy infantry list. The Tully Swan shields, if they can get onto something similar to the Baratheon Wardens, once one spawns on their side of the map and they get on it, they won't be giving it up very easily.
Mm-hmm.
It's all tough. I'm gonna go. I would guess the Sworn Swords with Syrio Pharrell because they're a very aggressive unit, and I expect him to use them. So
Okay, so you can see there we've got R'hllor Faithful from Stannis and Stark Sworn Swords from Bob Bernard as the 2 units that 2 infantry units that die first in that game. Okay, I think that ends Table 1's discussion. Let's move to Table 2. We've got Ariakas versus De Border. This is a Stark versus Stark, isn't it?
Stark. What can I say? What can I say other than maybe a bit
Starks will win.
facetiously, I don't care.
Okay.
No, we see it's not a completely boring matchup. We have Rob from the Border playing into Howland Eddard. So we're not talking about just a straight Rob mirror matchup here.
Mm-hmm.
Ariakas is one of the highest performing Starks not running Rob.
Yeah.
Bob also running Howland Roderick.
Mm-hmm.
But interestingly, we don't see that many Eddards. And he is up there running that Eddard list. So that is interesting to see.
Okay. I mean, I'm just looking at the lists here. I mean, he runs the Tully Cavaliers in his Eddard list, which, yes, they're not brilliant in this particular game mode, and it doesn't play into what they want. With the likes of the corpse piles and this kind of like having a nice Alpha Strike unit. The Tully Cavaliers do provide that. So having something like that which he can really use to kind of push his way onto an objective if De Border was to reach it first. Yes, it would give control over to De Border with that first corpse pile, but I really think it would push the game's control actually in favor of Ariakas because he will go effectively an activation up for the rest of the game and control that corpse pile as well. Um, what I did want to mention is that both of De Border's lists are 9 activations. Ariakas' Eddard list is also 9, but his Howland list is 10. So if we see the Howland list come out with that extra activation, yes, it's risky. He doesn't run the on-field commander, but do you think that that is a potential way for Ariakas to get a bit of a leg up in the matchup, maybe?
I think Feast for Crows is interesting and one of my preferred game modes because of the way it drives players into such a small space, and because the objectives will stay within those corpse piles for for the whole game, they can't leave them. And destroying an opponent's unit effectively has a bounce back mechanic where a new objective, which is going to be strongly in their control side of things, is spawned. It's interesting that I think it goes against most other game modes flow of high activation is a very strong way to control the game. I think that aggressive early activations have a big role to play, and also kind of losing units is not the biggest thing because of the way it allows you to generate new VP options.
Yeah.
Do I think that a 10 versus 9 matchup is significant in this case? No, I think it's less significant than the possible extra victory point for having an on-field commander
Okay.
in this particular case because of the way activation advantage I don't think is such a big player here, and I think that gaining VPs is a balance because when you destroy units, you give your opponent control of more VPs. It makes it much more difficult for you to just get there and zone them out of the game and then force them into making bad plays in that kind of way. So I think that it's really going to be Ed versus one of the Rob lists.
Yep.
I
And
feel like I feel like De Border is one of the players more confident in his 2 NCU pick. And
yes,
having more units on the board is quite powerful here because everything that you can sacrifice on the board allows control of those objectives. His 2 NCU list, though, does run a pair of cavalry, so that is not such a strong way to control because they're not infantry units that you can sacrifice.
it is worth noting though, his 3 NCU list runs Varys, Baelish, and Sansa, so it doesn't run Arya, which I think Arya for this particular game mode, with the likelihood of having quite a lot of terrain that affects movement, um, I think Arya probably is something that's worth talking about because you're gonna have to close distance a lot more. Um, yeah, I don't know. I do think his second list it runs double Tully Sworn shields, which is quite defensive. Um, so maybe that's the route he wants to go down. But maybe his first list with the double cavalry, but where he's got the double Stark Sworn swords, he's got bowmen, and then he has the two cavalry and the wolves obviously to support him. Maybe that's the route he wants to go down. Not really
I
sure.
think Swan Swords are quite a strong unit into this game mode in general
Mm,
because, as with many Stark units, you can't leave them low health, low because they haven't lost a huge amount of offensive potential.
yeah,
They're still quite dangerous, but finishing off units is not straightforward in this game mode. It needs to be timed around who's going to gain objectives from it.
Yeah.
and where they will be placed. So yeah, I like sworn swords. Obviously, the berserkers fall massively into that category too. They're actually at their highest damage output. Um, oh,
Yeah.
it's tough. It's tough. We are just talking about a Stark mirror matchup here, and two players who have gone undefeated with Starks, obviously up until this point.
Mhm.
For me, I'm slightly drawn towards Ariakas's Howland list when I look at it.
Yep.
I like Mira, the Cunning Trapper in the Archers. That's quite a nice zonal control against a list which is guaranteed to have dogs in. Both of the Borders lists have two dogs in.
Mhm.
So that is a good way to zone him out and stop them from being used effectively. And more cavalry on the Borders side, he's going to have to use them quite aggressively down the center of the table to mean that he is ready to strike where new objectives and new corpse powers are placed. He's going to have to match them up into those bowmen, probably. I think I like Howland, but I'm kind of torn. I don't know enough about the Stark mirror matchup
Mhm.
to really tell you where the subtleties lie.
Yeah. Um, I'm not sure myself. I'm looking at these. I'm not really 100% sure myself, but I'm more drawn towards Eddard in the mirror matchup than I am Rob. Um, and I also believe that Howland has more options than Rob as well. And I think as we talked about there, if he gets one or both, I mean, if he kills one dog with Mira, that offsets at least one turn of not having an NCU commander on the field. Um, if he kills both dogs with Mira during that game, that will offset 2 points. So that's 2 turns of having the on-field commander. Um, and obviously it gives a massive advantage. He already goes up one activation advantage. That would take him up 3, obviously, as well. So it really limits the effectiveness of the dogs across the map. Um, he does have Rickon in Stormcrow Mercenaries, which says to me he's going to throw those in and maybe get them killed off. Um, but obviously that gives 2 points away as well. Well, a unit of Naked Stark Sworn Swords. I'm tempted by Ariakas. The activation advantage has got me thinking that if he can be very careful with how he picks to attack in those like final stages of the turn, he'll be able to do a panic check on something, hopefully, at the end of the turn of which Deborah can do nothing about. So either passes or fails. And that can obviously give him a point swing when he needs it at the end of a turn. Um, I'm tempted by the Howland list, and I'm going to say Ariakas, I think,
How
in
much
my
do you
opinion.
think that Walder Frey into a possible Varys matchup matters?
Yeah, so I mean, that is obviously a big question as well. Walder Frey appearing in his Howland list. Um, I do think that Walder Frey going into Varys is obviously really big. Um, I do.
I just think that Ariakis' Howland list has more anti-Stark tools,
Yes,
and I think that it is in his advantage, and that it puts pressure on the border to make the bigger plays. It puts pressure on him to outplay him.
I also don't
Maybe he
like.
can, but I think that the pressure is on the border to outplay Ariakas here.
I also don't like the inclusion of Baelish in De Border's second list. Baelish in the mirror matchup, I do not see being useful because his ability to take a zone that is unoccupied, well, the chances are that the Ariakas is going to want to take the same zones anyway. So So Baelish doesn't
Really, you want to be
really.
covering whatever zone you want to take. You want to be covering up because you
Yes.
want to deny it to your opponent.
So only in very unique situations where maybe his Deborah can set something up where he wants the zone twice and Ariakas really doesn't.
It does
Um,
play into Boulder though. You could on the turns where you're first, you can cover up the crowns, but not have to take the crowns effect. There is that value there.
that is true, but you've got
The
Varys.
pair of them, that 8 point investment into Varys and Peter Baelish, is probably an over investment into countering Walder Frey at 5 points.
Yeah, and then we're not even talking about Howland and the effect that Howland can have, which it seems to be fairly good from the people that seem to run him. Um, I'm going to say it. Ariakas, Howland's list.
Yeah, I'm unsure, but I think that that's where it is for me.
Yeah, I'd say this is a very. Hopefully, we'll get this one on stream. I think this is going to be a very good game. I think it's going to be very close.
Yeah.
Um, first two infantry units to die. Then are we going to say? I mean, this in itself is a
Stark
whole long
Swan Sword.
conversation. Um,
I'm gonna go with Stark Swan Swords probably
Starks on
because
swords. From who though? That's a good question.
do we have to stay?
Yeah, we do.
uh
Probably it depends what list DeBorder runs, right? Because DeBorder doesn't run any in his second list.
yeah. Okay, I think that he will play Varys, Baelish, and Sansa
So it's going to be Tully.
because I think the double cavalry doesn't provide him with the right balance for this. The bowman gives some zonal control, and he has to try and get those Tully Cavaliers to smash into Mirror Reed to get rid of that trap
Mm-hmm.
if she's being aggressive up the table. So then that means that you're talking about some Tully Swan shields and some Stark Bowmen. I think the first thing that might die is something of Ariakas's.
The Stormcrow
Um,
mercenaries with Rickon, do you think?
that's a very sacrificial unit if you're going to go for that.
It could be his naked. If he runs the Howland list, his naked swan swords as well.
Yeah, I think it. I think it will be his naked Stark Swan swords. I think that you have to be sending them up there aggressively to grab one of those objectives, and force the border to make a play on one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What gets taken in return?
Tully Swan shields.
It asks for infantry. It asks for infantry specifically, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that the Tully Cavaliers might be very aggressively smashed into the center of the army, but whether or not they die is a big question.
Yeah. I think I'm
I
happy
guess
with the
he's
two
going to
picks.
have to lose one of the units of Tully Swan shields, otherwise he's going to win the game.
Well, yeah.
If he manages to get them up there, then come turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, if they're still alive, then that's
DeBorder's
going to
probably
be
won.
then he's won that game. Even if he's given up the advantage to place the new corpse piles on
Mm-hmm.
both of the units, if he's controlling the two ones in the middle and destroyed the units that were controlling them, then he's probably in control of the game.
Yeah, I tend to agree. So I'm going to say Tully Swan shields from DeBorder, thinking that one unit will die, and the Stark Swan swords from Ariakas.
Yeah.
Okay. We will move on to table 3 then. It's
Yeah.
Forioku versus Codfather. This is actually a somewhat of an interesting matchup because Starks aren't in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Hooray!
Oh, hey, we are guaranteed that going into the second to last round, there will be at least one non-Stark.
Yes.
Like I say, I'd love to see Stannis win and make it a
Breath
2-2 kind of thing. We
Mhm.
will definitely see two Starks up there because we have a pair of Stark matchups.
Yep.
But yes, this is pretty interesting. Neutral into free folk, a lot more to talk about.
Mhm.
Except, I mean, beyond which units just get destroyed, I'm just gonna say this goes with the free folk for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, as an avid free folk player, this kind of game mode, I think the only stuff I've ever struggled with is actually lists that you put together, Carlo, in the Lannister faith lists where you just can't smash them. Yes, you'll kill me, but actually you'll get enough of an advantage in killing me and in controlling the middle section of the game that I can pull it close. You know, we've had quite a lot of close games, including a tournament game that had to go unfinished because of time, which we talked about at the time and could have really gone either way, but you happen to be in the lead of. Um, I think that Free Folk are very strong on this particular game mode, especially if the talking about like the geometry of the way that you can make it work for you. It's possible to exhibit control with units of trappers on turn one, if you're clever. And so if you can control that token and get it to your side of the corpse pile, and then force the enemy to have to kill the trappers. And then we're talking about Codfather running a neutral list. When he runs in, he's going to be doing quite a lot of damage. He's probably going to be vicious. Let's be honest, he is probably going to be killing things like units of trappers with probably real ease. But that doesn't help him anymore because it's worth no victory points, and he puts that objective corpse pile, that new one, back into Furioka's favour. So if Furioka plays quite an
All of
aggressive
that,
push,
while insignificant, means that you haven't even scored a VP for it.
Yeah. Furioka can have this quite aggressive push on the board. I believe that Free Folk, as a general term, or general play style, need to be playing quite pushy. They're not a faction that sits back and goes, look, we're gonna play carefully and tactically and beat you that way. They have to push up and play carefully and tactically in front of your face. Provide you with charge options, but go, look, nothing you want to charge will allow you to be in a better position than you currently are. And especially when he runs, Furioka's second list runs a lot of Skin Changer Bears. More units to control objectives, vicious with hits that can't be blocked. This is easy ways to get rid of tokens on units and just go, look, you have the token, but no, you don't anymore.
On Codfather's side, though, he does have some interesting plays and he has some value here. I want to say that he's going to run his Roost list, but he's spat in my face pretty much every time I've said that so far in this event, and proved time and time again that he is doing better with the Ramsey list than I think it should be. In the last round, I said he would run Roos and I said that he would lose, and instead he ran Ramsey, got a huge victory, and not only did he win by big VPs, he also practically wiped his opponent out.
Yep.
So he definitely has something there with that aggressive Ramsey list. Lots of cutthroats. So 2 units of cutthroats, 2 units of bastard girls with Stormcrow lieutenants in. That's a lot of vicious and a lot of aggression. But I think there's just too much stuff to kill on the Free Folk side. What I'm actually more interested in is whether or not Walder Frey can get his real value here. He can be shutting off either a giant or he can be shutting off those Bone Lords Chosen, getting rid of absolute ton of keywords all in one go. What comes in with that is 2 units of Cutthroats, a unit of Blackguard, who I think are a great matchup into Free Folk in general, forcing that check before and after, and again, pretty great into this game mode if you can get them out there onto that objective. Big question, because the Free Folk should be faster, should be getting there first. The Flayed Men could well pull quite a bit of value here. They need to pull their value, though. They need to pull their weight. Otherwise, the game is over. So I think it's how much can Walder do and Varys do? And the question is I look here and I ask the question, I really ask the question right now that I look at these lists. Why does Furioka not run Egret in either list?
I know.
Egret NCU is the bane of Walder Frey, and you place Egret onto your own unit. Your opponent doesn't even get to choose to counter it because it's the person whose unit that you have influenced gets to choose whether or not to stop her effect, and you just deny Walder's shut off ability. So I think that fully blows this game mode open a little bit. I think that it has to be Roos. I think that Walder has a huge amount of value here.
Yeah.
I think that Varys can also make some plays. And I don't think that's enough. I still think that Harmer's going to take the game.
Yeah. One thing I will say is I think Forioku's lists, he doesn't run many naked units. Every unit of raiders that he runs typically has a skin changer, or Commander Harmer, and obviously Harmer's Bannerman in it. The Bone Lord's Chosen appearing in both lists, and then one list having a giant, one list not. Obviously, one having the more raiders to compensate. It means that when Furioku, although he currently has a lot of influence on the board and a lot of units, especially if he takes a considerable number of bears. Obviously, with the terrain, we might see the likelihood of him picking an eagle out as well, to give him the option to get good charges off. But every time he loses one of these raider units, which they will die easily to this kind of like panic-based Ramsey or Roos list, he's going to be losing more than just the unit. He is going to be losing the bear as well. So he has to be using the bears aggressively, which actually he doesn't really want to be doing because he wants to be using them at the end of the rounds to proc Vicious to get rid of tokens.
Yeah.
So I don't personally like Furioku's lists into this particular game mode. I think personally I run two trappers into all of the control token based game modes because I feel that with the 6-inch movement and the powerful options that you have, that control that you can exert on turn 1 is just so powerful. And so I am less attracted by Furioku's Harmer lists, but I am probably going to say he runs his second list without the giant. And if he runs that list, I do think he's got options, and I do think he's going to probably take the win. But I do think it's going to be a good game, and I do hope to catch on stream.
Yeah, I think that there is a list that Furioku could write, which would be incredibly difficult for any neutral list, even if you knew that you were playing into Free Folk, even if you knew what the game mode was. I think if you both told these players, okay, you're playing Free Folk in Feast for Crows versus neutrals, and then on the flip side, you told Codfather, okay, you're playing neutrals into Free Folk in Feast for Crows. Both write a list for that matchup for that game mode. I think that Free Folk can write a list that the neutrals just can't beat.
I would tend to agree. I mean, certainly
But
from
that's
a
not the
mirrored
list
player
that
skill.
Furioku have here.
Yeah, I think from a mirrored player skill, certainly. Which we have to assume at this point that they are roughly equally skilled.
Yeah. If anything, Codfather keeps outperforming my expectations. So, Furioku can only achieve my expectations, which I think that Harmer is incredibly strong, and he's picked 2 Harmer lists. But Codfather is outperforming what I think he can do or should be doing with neutrals, and even more than that, he's outperforming in game modes where I don't think that Ramsey is the better choice. He is still playing him and still winning.
Yeah. So I think this is very difficult. I think I'm going to have the final say. And I actually think I'm going to say Codfather.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it. I've almost talked myself out of the initial comment, which is that I don't think that Free Folk should lose this game. I think you're right. I think that that Furioku doesn't have Egret is a huge oversight, in my opinion. It makes Walder incredibly valuable when the Bone Lords Chosen are in a dangerous position. You can shut them all down. When they're not, you can get rid of an insignificant and score yourself VPs that the Free Folk aren't normally giving up. And I just think that all his skin changes and all his expensive units, they give up what should be a massive activation advantage. And turn it into a massive on-field presence advantage. But that's there's only so many infantry units you're allowed to lose to put down new VPs, and that's 2. Yeah, I
Um,
like your choice. I mean, I'm not convinced, but I like your choice.
I'm not convinced either. But we have to make a decision. We can talk about it all
Yeah.
day. But I am going to say Codfather. I do. That doesn't mean I think he's going necessarily to win. I think it's I'm putting more money on Codfather than Furioku, but I really think that this is probably like a 50.001% to 49.999%, decision in my head. Um, if the wind changed outside, I'd probably say Furioku. Let's put it like that. In terms of what dies first, I am going to straight up say it. Furioku's trappers. If he runs that trappers in the game, they should be dying first.
If these trappers aren't dying first, then these players are not playing this game mode the way I think it's played.
And if I was again to say another unit, I think it has to be a
I
unit of
think.
raiders.
Do you see? I think that a unit of cutthroats have to be sacrificed in return. Then the question comes down to whether or not Furyoku even, shall we say, takes the bait and destroys the unit at all,
I think for him
or if
to
he effectively tries to feed in another unit of raiders to gain complete control of the board in that way.
I think for him to control the game in the way we want, he would have to run the trappers up one flank and the Bone Lord's Chosen up the other. And when the Bone Lord's Chosen are controlling the objective on the far side, I don't think he can risk Harmer's unit controlling a central objective, because I think with the just panic tests at -1 and then compounding by anything else that's done to them, which the neutrals can do, they can just go, look, there's a panic token and here's a panic test. Harmer will just melt. He wouldn't even have to invest any units to do it. So
I think Furyoku is going to win. He throws a unit of trappers forward. That unit has to be destroyed.
yep.
They've got hold of this token, and you're gonna deploy a new objective on your own side and sit Harmer on it, and that's 2 points a turn, and that's before we even talk about the other side of the map.
But do we even consider that Harmer doesn't exist on the map? Maybe he's after turn 3
Oh,
from
so
just
the
solid
Flayed Men
doing
are going to
panic
go out there and
tests.
take her. The
Not
Flayed
even
Men are
just
going
flayed
to
men, but
go
just
out there and destroy her.
even just
But
taking
how do you
crowns.
go out and destroy her? How do you
Taking
go out and
crowns.
destroy her? Ugh.
Doing -1 panic checks on a unit with nine effective morale that may or may not be near a corpse pile at then 10. The chances are she's going to be failing. It's only 2 wounds, sure, as a minimum, but you've got panic. Panic tokens is your thing. You're going to be expecting to put panic tokens out.
You're still
I
talking
like
about an
Codfather.
average of 4 tests.
Yeah,
You have to take crowns every single time. You
which
have
you're
to
going to do
not
anyway if you're
be
going to take Walder.
okay, but but you're going to have to take crowns every single time without your opponent blocking you, without your opponent taking money bags, and without them ever playing regroup and reform.
I completely agree. Completely agree. I just think that's a lot of resources to invest in Harmer when he's going to be losing. Like at the moment, all I'm doing is investing Walder, and I'm not even using Walder's ability to go on top of Harmer.
I mean, Walder cost you more than Harmer.
It's true. It is
Walder
true.
cost you 5, and you're going to use his ability every single round to take crowns, and it's not going to come into effect until at least the 3rd round. But really, I'm saying you're not going to destroy me until the 5th round, because
Yep.
all I have to do is take money bags once, and I undo a round's worth of damage. If
I
I'm
do
not
agree.
using these bears to block your attempts to make a charge into
You see,
Harmer, then there's
you're
no point
convincing me
in
that
using
Furioka will
bears.
take it. You are convincing me.
Exactly. I'm not convincing.
No, you are convincing me.
I am. I am. So the neutrals, they have no, as far as I'm aware, they have no out of activation charges.
No.
And so they can't do any zone replace effects for additional charges in that way.
No.
You're entirely limited to what a unit can charge and destroy each turn. And when there's that many bears in your way, how are you supposed to destroy enough things that are worth anything before? I mean, if you use Walder, you can do a wound to a bear, but that's still a slow process. For me, the trappers die, and either the cutthroats die in return, or Furioku feeds another unit of raiders while refusing to kill the cutthroats, which effectively, from my mind, it sits on whether or not the cutthroats are holding the objective.
Yeah.
If the cutthroats can hold the objective, they get killed in return. If they're not holding the objective because they get charged and drop it from a failed panic check, or maybe Furioku takes a crown to zap them to make them drop it because he's trying to keep Harmer alive. If he can get the cutthroats off the objective, there's no value to him killing them back, and he should just feed another unit of raiders to something, so that he can have complete control on his side of the battlefield. And basically then he just tells Codfather, you must charge to this many bears, you must charge to this many insignificant units before you can score any points.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It's really tough because
it does come down to how the first few turns play out. And I think that the tactics board is more important than people think here in this game mode to controlling what is the upper limit of the amount of stuff that Codfather can destroy.
Yeah, with this particular matchup, I would tend to agree that the tactics board plays into it a lot more than perhaps in other matchups. I'm really on the fence. I think Free Folk have an advantage. I really do think Free Folk have the advantage. The question ultimately is, do I look at Codfather's previous results of bucking the trend continuously and say that is the deciding factor?
He's probably just going to run Ramsey and absolutely wipe him off the table.
Yeah, he probably is. Come on, final call. Furioku, Codfather. Free Folk, neutrals.
I have to go with Furioku and his second Harmer list. He's made it a game by not bringing a grit, but that he's only made it a game.
Yeah.
He's not given the complete advantage away here.
Sure.
And it's gonna be Trappers die, and I think I would go Cutthroat second.
Yeah.
I would go Cutthroat second because he does probably trade it more than he manages to force like a double feeding.
Okay. So Trappers, Cutthroats, Furioku, Codfather, and Furioku to take the game. Calling it there. Okay.
Finally.
That moves us on to table 4 now. Thankfully, table 4 is going to be... there's not really a huge amount to say that we haven't said already, because it is a Stark versus Stark, isn't it?
Yeah. Stark. Howland Brynden versus Howland Robb.
What do you reckon?
So Frerin's Robb list runs some cutthroats, which is going to be vicious, but at the same time, you are low morale yourself, low token control.
Yeah.
He has Mirror Read, Cunning Trapper, again something that I like. Into the matchup, he's running just 2 NCUs in his Howland list with 5 units of infantry. It's a very high activation list that, in terms of combat units, 5 infantry plus the Stark Outriders plus Summer and Shaggy Dog.
We talked about this list at length actually on the last video, where it's 10 activations in total, of which he has 8 on field, and 6 of them are fully fledged units. So that's 72 wounds. That's a lot. That's a lot of meat, and 5 of those are infantry.
From Larks, we see Howland, who is also high in the activation. Yeah. He's got some dogs. He's got dogs in both lists, so Mirror as a trapper has value. He runs Tully Sworn Shields with Mirror Read. That's actually a very aggressive combination against Starks because he can throw them right forward and zone off the dogs in a bigger way than if than when we talked earlier about, I believe, was it
In the other matchup.
Ariakas, who we were talking about having
Yeah.
them in some bowmen. So they have to be far more carefully placed because they are open to being blown away by some big cavalry charges. I don't know.
mean,
Like I say, Stark. I don't understand the dynamics of the matchup as well as I should, being not a big Stark player myself. I see what I see across the table and what I want to play into and how I want to play it, but I don't understand from a Stark perspective what they're trying to achieve in the Stark versus Stark matchup. I'm gonna go with Larks, and to be honest, I'm not even gonna say why. Like I'm just gonna go with Larks. There you go.
that's fair enough. Yeah, I am torn. I mean, I do like Farron's first list with just the sheer number of wounds and the sheer amount of pressure he can put on. And I mean, I think it comes back to a conversation we had earlier and a shout out really. Um, Farron's first list runs Cranagman trackers, and
Cranagman
if
trackers with a Cranagman Warden.
yep,
Movement 6. They can do everything that those.
and
See,
Arya.
now they do run the track. He does run the Warden. So you are talking about a 6-point unit now. So you don't have. You are giving up so much more to do the same effect that we are talking about with the free folk trappers. You're giving up 6 points, not 4 points. You don't get a trapping effect for having done it, and you're not insignificant.
I agree.
So to use them in that sacrificial way is far, far riskier.
Agreed, but I think they can be because they can be very aggressive when they do it. They can do a lot of damage in the process of doing it. I mean, interestingly, Larks' second list also has them in exactly the same combo in. So, you know, I do see from Frerin his second list has 2 units of Housebolt and Cutthroats that you can just throw away almost. It's 5-point units that you might want to just expend to control. But I prefer Larks. I think Larks has got the Frerin's lists seem to be a little bit all in, running multiple sworn swords and cutthroats and multiples of units, generally speaking, across the board with maybe different attachments. And I think Larks brings to the table more varied lists with a mix of sworn shields and sworn swords. A couple of mercs coming in there, and then also Caravan trackers as well. I would tend to agree. I think Larks brings more variance of utility to the table with his lists, and so I'm going to say Larks.
For
Two
me, the first unit to go for Larks to win the game and control it, he wants to get rid of the Stark Sworn Swords with Mira Reed's Cunning Trapper. That will suddenly enable his dogs to start doing some real damage and work.
Stark Sworn Swords. Okay, so Stark Sworn Swords, and that will be Frerin's unit that dies first.
Frerin's unit.
Second unit to die, do you reckon?
Tough, it depends on what Larks is going to pick. Brynden might be the take into this.
In which case, it would probably be his naked Tully Sworn shields that he uses as something on the objective to try and control it early and then get killed off.
You think that they will go that early though?
I don't know if they'll die that early, but I think it's what he'll use to get the control early.
He will, but they are one of the with a Brynden commander as well. They are an incredibly tough prospect to kill off.
I agree. I'm actually tempted to say Frerin's Housebolt and Cutthroats might be the second unit to die. I
agree.
I'm looking at this and
I'll go for that. Yeah.
I think that Frerin is in a difficult spot. I just don't really see a list. He does have the activation advantage if Larks does go for the Brynden list, but I don't really see these matchups favouring Frerin too much in most scenarios. I just think Larks
I guess so.
brings more variance to the table, hence the reason I chose him to win the game. And I think he can just, like, as long as he doesn't melt, which is always possible with the likes of dice rolls, I think Larks will just push across the table and apply this wall of activation and armor that Frerin just won't be able to push through in the way that he wants to.
Yeah.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of table 4. Larks to win that one, and that is the end of the first 4 tables. We will be looking at tables 5 through 32 in our own time. Again, that's not because they're not important, very important, but we've been going for over an hour now, and we could talk at some lengths, especially some of the matchups. They're really interesting. Was there any ones you particularly wanted to shout out? Not really discuss, but just
No,
shout-outs?
I've barely managed to look myself. Actually, I spend more time, it seems, discussing the intricacies of what is a correct Swiss draw than actually really getting to look at what's going on in the competition. So
Yeah.
there is that part of it.
We won't go down that rabbit hole just now because I think your head will
No.
explode of anger. So I think there's a couple of ones here. Table 7 for me. So Cisgender Mystery Knight. It's a Targ Lannister matchup. Mystery Knight had a very successful run up until this last round. And I think So Cisgender was in a similar kind of ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that might
Mm-hmm.
be quite a good game.
Yeah, very interesting. It's always they are the two highest placed Targaryen and Lannister respectively players, and they were both unbeaten until the last round.
Mm-hmm.
I know that Mystery Knight lost by only a single VP,
Yeah,
so unfortunate to not be taking Targaryens almost all the way and massively bucking the trend.
definitely. Another one, I've got to obviously shout out Shalashaska. It's a Night's Watch mirror matchup, Sizemaj versus our old friend Daryl over at NRG. It's a Night's Watch mirror matchup, and I always think, although we've talked about Stark mirror matchups a lot, I do think mirror matchups are very interesting to get data from, because I think that it really gives you a much better insight as to how the list's functionalities and how the individual components function in a much better way. So I think that could be an interesting game to see the result of.
Interesting thing that you just reminded me of. We talked last week about whether or not Night's Watch were going to book the Dark Winds, Dark Words trend, and they did not.
No.
They won 25% of the games in Dark Winds, Dark Words. They still only win a quarter of the time. We now have doubled the amount of results that we have for that game mode, for Night's Watch in particular, and they are still bad at it.
Yeah.
There is not enough dynamic versatility in them.
Mm-hmm.
So from back in the day when people thought that Night's Watch were too strong, too good, we are talking a long time ago, talking specifically about John.
Mm-hmm.
But I think people just weren't considering the secret deck as something that is in the mix when you talk about that. And I think it is their Achilles heel. They don't have the right kind of options for it.
Yep. Tend to agree completely. To be honest, I think we saw the dominance of Night's Watch, and really, I mean, what I'd be more interested in, going back to the old Night Watch dominant, Swarm Brother spam with John style days. How many game modes were actually being played at tournament levels that were victory through combat game modes? And that's a statistic that I'm sure is probably out there, but certainly not on my fingertips right now, and I don't know if it's just easily accessible. But my bet would be that a lot of tournaments ran very killy. We use the phrase killy scenarios. And I think that really plays into the Night's Watch. In which case the balancing that they received, perhaps that would be questionable whether or not that was necessarily a good thing, because it made them weaker in the game modes they were strong in, but it didn't address the game modes they were struggling in.
Yep, that was an interesting insight.
Other ones, I mean, let's go down. I'm gonna point him out because we mentioned him at the start of the video. Corin versus CS Sully here. CS Sully, I really hope you have a much better game this round. I know Corin has had an up and down tournament himself, but I've heard that he's a great opponent. So hopefully you'll have a great matchup there, great game, and I really hope you win it. Just to soften the blow a little bit from last game. Aside from that, Bolton Skincare again, I'll just shout out here. Best name of the tournament still, my favourite name. Superb. I think it's just so thematic. I just love
I
it.
know he probably gets more attention than he needs, but we'll see whether or not Brett can bounce back from losing to Bob. We'll see what Brett's made of. He can, of course, still go up into second place. So we'll see what happens there, and if he's got what it takes, that's another Stark versus Baratheon matchup. But Jason Zeri only runs Renly Charismatic Air and Courtney Penrose. He doesn't have access to those R'hllor Faithful, who I think are the key to this game mode for the Baratheons. So it might not. I guess just off the very quick analysis, I would expect Brett to bounce back, and we may yet see him high up in this event.
Yeah. Okay then. We'll round it off there. We've talked about a lot of things today. We've given you insights as to rounds, units, matchups, mirror matchups. We talked about Starks more than we cared to talk about Starks ever again. It's still 2 more weeks, two more of these still to come, including, of course, our final talks talking about the top table and then any other things that we've got. So obviously shout outs to the West Coast Bannermen. Was Peacekeeper Games, Carl Kirsten, for producing the predictions every week. It's great to see. Shout out to all the various sponsors. So we've got things like Small Council Radio. Come on, help me out here, Carlo. You remember them?
Mythicos Studios,
yes.
as well, and of course On the Table Gaming. There was a lot of work from Chase over the last weekend, which I'm sure so many people saw from the CMON Expo. So a lot of great stuff happening there. Yeah,
Brilliant.
All important that everybody's involved, and there has been some negativity at times towards the event. Some things about the way it's been run from only a very few minor entrants and some non-entrants as well. Some people who aren't even part of the competition have been, I would say, taking shots at it. But this has been put on by myself and the other sponsors at our expense for the community at this time, and I really do want it to be better in the future. I really am open to discussions around whether or not Dark Winds, Dark Words is a competitive game mode, but I wasn't going to write it off without having given it a go. I have a new level of understanding of how difficult it is as a TO because of how many
queries,
awkward interactions there are between the rules, and how there can be many different interpretations of the way they're played, and how it's just more difficult to run a game mode when people aren't familiar with it, because people will get things wrong. People will come to you with questions when, I mean, they've effectively been answered. Some of them effectively that people's interpretation is wrong. I'm not saying that that's a problem, but their interpretation is wrong because it's the first time they've read the rule. It's the first time they've looked at it, and not until you've seen it played in the game mode do you think about whether or not, oh, actually, that might not be the correct interpretation.
Yeah.
There were more things which I thought, oh, I really see both sides of this. But anyway, I think that we can improve this, and I think that we can run TTS events in the future that will be bigger and better. But for now, this is my best attempt. So all I'd say is stick with it. And I'm really grateful to all the other sponsors who are really helping this event happen and giving up some prizes to some people who entered for free.
Yeah.
So,
my final shout outs, as you know, I've been helping out Carlo a lot with a small amount of TO stuff, keeping him sane, or trying to. Mostly I annoy him, actually. But I I've been trying to, do all these stats as we see on the spreadsheets and trying to put together stuff for Carlo. And there's been a lot of people talking about the stats as well. Really interesting feedback as well from what they want to see, and we are working on it. I'm going to spend some time on it when I can, but it's worth remembering that I still have a job to do and things like that, and still have my own life to lead.
I
Um,
don't.
no, Carla doesn't. So we are working on it. We are listening to feedback. We are taking it on board. We are trying to implement it, put things in place, and once we're happy, a couple more talks, a couple more kind of things that we're going to look at. We're going to see what we can do for the community in terms of like producing these stats in a really nice way. Because what we want to be able to do is give you, a 64 player tournament statistical breakdown looking at literally anything that you want. Um,
Mm.
and I think, going forward, this is something that me and Carlo are going to talk about and, try and do. But we are going to see if we can roll this out across to any event that's currently being run as well.
Yeah,
So,
it's one thing for us to sit here and feed you small, interesting statistics that we've found. But it's a whole other thing, and the ultimate goal is to basically create ways for people to record and look at statistics themselves.
yeah.
You know, people should be able to, anybody with interest should be able to look at these statistics and decide what they think is relevant and what they think is not relevant, and where they want to find new answers. It's
Mhm.
not, in my mind, for me to say, oh, this is winning, this is what you should play, this is what you should do. It's a tool. It's a tool for anybody who's willing to engage with, to be able to learn new stuff
Mhm.
and improve their own gameplay, because that's what it's all about in the end. Kind of having new perspectives on the game, being able to see metas outside of your own, and really making just you question the things that you thought you already knew about the game.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we'll end it there then. Obviously, again, massive shout out to everybody, be that sponsors, and feedback and players as well. From generally speaking across the board, the players have been very easy to deal with, pleasant, and understandable. So yeah. Anyway, guys, we'll catch you next time.